In this video clip, I'm going to show you how to make an encased welt cord or a self-covered cord where the seam allowance is on the inside of the cording and not on the outside of the cording. So this would be the kind of cording you would use as a decorative element and not sewn in the seam. I'm going to start by pulling off the amount of cord that I need, and then I need more cord beyond that. That's going to be what gets self-covered. So you do have to have excess cording. I'm going to stitch across the welt cord. And then turn, and I'm going to sew next to the cord and not into the cord. You'll see I've got a teeny tiny little skinny foot for sewing this. This is a really narrow foot, just a regular old 2-finger foot to use for sewing. You could use a zipper foot. It's hard sometimes not to catch the cording. You want to be able to turn it right side out, so you don't want to catch the cording. I find that this little narrow presser foot works really well. So I'm just going to sew right next to the cording, and I can do a bigger stitch length, I think, on that. You don't want the stitch length to be too big because there's a lot of tension on the seam when you turn the cording right side out. And I'll just continue to sew this. When I get to the seam, I'm going to press it open with my hands and keep going. Now I will have to trim the seam allowance. Got caught up on that. There we go. Because it's easier to turn if you don't have a lot of bulk inside. So I might not have to. I'll try it first without trimming the seam allowance, but sometimes you have to go in and trim some of the seam allowance away. So when I get to the end, then we can turn it right sides out. That's good. At the end here, I'm going to trim away at an angle because this is going to be turning on itself. And I think some of the seam allowance does need to be trimmed off. It looks like my welt cord was not cut perfectly even. I'm also going to trim away some of this excess from where the cording was joined. That looks good. I'm going to put on some sew grip gloves. These will help with turning the encased cord. You also can just use rubber gardening gloves or gloves you would use in washing dishes. I'm going to turn this around and start pulling this down on itself. It'll gather up, and that's fine. I'm just going to set the presser foot down to hold it in place while I'm pulling. I didn't mean to sew into that. I just wanted to hold it. There we go. Using your presser foot as a clamp is a great thing to do when you're sewing. There we go. Now I'm down to where I'd stitched across the welt cord. That can be a little tricky, getting that to turn over on itself. You know, you have to sort of work with it a little bit. I might have to get some tweezers just to get it over itself. Once it comes over itself, it's pretty easy to do. I want to get the tweezers and work on that a little bit. There we go. Now, see, it'll start turning fairly easy. And then continue gathering it on itself. So it's sort of stuffing itself as you go. Whoops. Once I get to a certain point, it'll really go fast. And you can see why I'm wearing these gloves now. Okay, we've made it to where we started. Now it'll go really fast. Some fabrics, such as a silk or something that frays, you will need to add an iron-on stabilizer, because you can see with all the tension of turning it right side out, those easy to fray fabrics would start falling apart. You can do microcord as an encased cord. It's a little tricky. It's something like you would see on spaghetti straps on a prom dress. That's how it's made. So here's the encased cord with this fabric. It sort of looks like a snake. But you can tie this into knots, apply it across the top of a valance, maybe a knot at each horn. On drapery panels, a knot, and then let this cord drape and then go to another pleat. You could do it on a pillow front or around the edges of a pillow. You can make creative knot styles such as frogs for closures. So I hope you'll enjoy making encased cord.